Imagine sailing for weeks across an endless ocean, while your supplies run low and morale drops. Then, a cluster of islands appears on the horizon, and you mark it down, certain you've made history. But when you share the discovery back home, that's when you realize nobody else will ever find those islands again. This is the mysterious and lost locations iceberg. Let's get into it. Tier 1. Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle sits between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. If you look at a map, it doesn't seem like much, just open water. Yet sailors avoid it, and pilots would rather burn extra fuel than cut across. The place has a reputation for eating things and never giving them back. The story goes back centuries, but the case that really got people talking happened in 1918. The USS Cyclops, a Navy ship hauling more than 300 crew members and a huge load of cargo, sailed in and never came out. And to this day, not a single piece of wreckage has been found. At first, people said it must have been a storm, or maybe even attacked during wartime. But then, two of the Cyclops' sister ships, Proteus and Nereus, also disappeared in the same waters during World War II. That's 3 ships of the same design gone in the same patch of ocean. By then, no one was blaming the weather anymore. It was pretty clear that something else was at play. Things escalated in 1945 when Flight 19, 5 Navy air bombers, went out on a routine training mission and none of them came back. A search plane was sent after them, and that disappeared too. Just like that, the Triangle managed to take 6 planes in a single afternoon, and nobody had a satisfying answer. By 1949, 3 more aircraft had joined the list. Scientists have tried to explain it in ways you can actually measure. Some point to sudden storms in the region, or powerful currents that can pull a ship off course. The most accepted explanation is that magnetic oddities can mess with compasses and leave pilots completely disoriented. Then there's the theory about methane gas eruptions from the sea floor, which could cause the water to froth and sink a vessel before anyone realizes what's happening. When science runs out of answers, aliens always get dragged in. That's exactly what happened here. Since the usual explanations didn't convince everyone, the fallback theory was that aliens were behind it. According to Navy records, at least 50 ships and 20 aircraft have vanished in the Bermuda Triangle. Thousands more traveled through it without issue. But that's what makes it worse, because you never know when the place decides to take something. The truth is simple. The triangle doesn't follow a pattern, and no one has ever produced a real explanation. It's just open water with a body count. As crazy as all this sounds, it's actually pretty tame. Just wait till Tier 3 where you'll see the bridge that put dogs in self-destruct mode. Area 51. For decades, Area 51 has been the most famous spot in America that nobody's actually allowed to see. It's a classified Air Force base tucked into Groom Lake, Nevada. They built it in 1955 to test the U-2 spy plane, and over the years, it's hosted plenty of other experimental aircraft. At least, that's the official story. The unofficial story is more fun. The base is under constant surveillance, and nobody without clearance gets anywhere near it. Give people a mystery wrapped in barbed wire, and it won't take long for conspiracy theories to sprout like weeds. That's how Area 51 became ground zero for some of the wildest ideas humans have managed to dream up. The base is tied to the 1947 Roswell crash, when something fell out of the sky in New Mexico. The Air Force said it was a weather balloon. People said that was hilarious. They insisted it was an alien spacecraft, and the government shipped off to Area 51 to hide it. From there, the theories multiplied. Some think the government is secretly chatting with aliens. Others claim they are testing nuclear weapons, building time machines, or even controlling the weather from the compound. The stories get stranger the more you look. In June 29, a guy named Matty Roberts posted on Facebook suggesting people raid Area 51. Over 2 million people said, sure, why not? By September, around 3,000 went to nearby music festivals. 150 showed up at the gates, but 1 got inside. Turns out it's easier to click interested on a Facebook invite than to break into a top-secret Air Force base. You can blame conspiracy theorists for all the buzz around Area 51, but wait till Tier 4, where you'll hear all about the time scientists came face-to-face with a glacier that literally bleeds. Stonehenge. Stonehenge is one of those places that looks like somebody dropped a giant construction project in the middle of a field, got bored halfway, and just left it there. You'll find it sitting out on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England. It's a big circle of massive stones arranged in rings, so it's impossible to miss. The setup is actually pretty elaborate. The outer ring is made of stones about 13 feet tall and 25 tons each, with horizontal stones balanced on top, like some prehistoric Lego set. Inside that are smaller blue stones, and then a third set of even larger stones topped with a single horizontal one. Whoever built this thing clearly wasn't into minimalism. Construction started around 3100 BC and dragged on until about 1600 BC. But the builders are still a mystery. And here's where it gets weirder. Those giant stones, called sarsens, were hauled in from Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles away. That means people were dragging or rolling 25-ton rocks across the countryside without cranes, forklifts, or even a half-decent wheelbarrow. Experts say the stones were likely hauled on wooden sledges with ropes, moved over timber rollers or tracks, and levered forward bit by bit. Some archaeologists think cattle might have been used too, though others argue the labor itself was meant to be done by people. Then comes the question, why? Why spend centuries arranging rocks in a circle in the middle of nowhere? Early archaeologists thought it was a druid temple, but that theory fell apart when they realized Stonehenge was standing long before the druids, Celtic priests who acted as teachers, judges, and religious leaders, ever appeared. Others have suggested it was a kind of ancient computer to predict eclipses, a burial site, a healing center, or even a prehistoric political hub where Bronze Age chiefs hashed out their problems. And just when you think the list of theories can't get stranger, scientists found out the stones have unusual acoustic properties. Stand inside and your voice gets amplified like a natural sound chamber. The discovery fueled the idea that Stonehenge might have been used for rituals involving sound, music, or chanting. So after all the hauling, stacking, and arranging, it's possible that Stonehenge was just a prehistoric complaint box where the whole village had to listen. Agartha. Some people believe there's a whole other world beneath our feet. Not just in caves or tunnels, but a massive underground civilization that's older, smarter, and way ahead of us. They call it Agartha. And according to legend, it's been hiding inside the earth for centuries. The story goes that its people once lived on the surface but got tired of human violence. So they packed up, moved underground, and never looked back. The idea of Agartha really took off in the 19th century, after French author Louis Jacoliot wrote about it. And then a French occultist named Alexandre Saint-Yves added his own spin in the late 1800s. That's when Agartha became a core part of the hollow earth theory, which is the belief that our planet isn't solid inside, but filled with hidden worlds and civilizations. The story gets weirder from there. Agartha is said to be connected to the surface by a network of tunnels supposedly built by a race called the Old Ones, who are stronger and more intelligent than humans. Some versions claim they still send agents up to the surface to observe us, which, if true, they're probably disappointed by what they've seen. Inside Agartha, millions of people are said to live under the rule of a single figure known as the King of the World. The king doesn't just run his underground domain, he's also rumored to influence the affairs of humanity. He's a bit of a micromanager who can't keep out of other people's business. Really cool guy. Believers say Agartha will only reveal itself when humanity finally stops being violent and learns to live in peace. When that happens, if it ever does, they claim the Hidden Kingdom will rise and share its secrets with us. Until then, it remains one of the most enduring myths that sits somewhere between spiritual hope and sci-fi fantasy, buried deep below everything we know. Unit 731. Today, Pingfang looks ordinary. Shops, apartments, traffic. Hard to imagine it once held one of the darkest facilities on Earth. Unit 731. Unit 731 began under General Shiro Ishii as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. But as the war progressed, the Japanese army turned the program into a research center for biological and chemical weapons. The compound was enormous, with laboratories, operating rooms, cremation facilities, and barracks for both staff and prisoners. Prisoners were used in brutal experiments to test diseases like anthrax, cholera, bubonic plague, and typhoid. Some were vivisected alive without anesthesia. Others were starved, frozen, electrocuted, or exposed to chemical agents, and many had limbs amputated or organs removed for study. Anyone who survived these tests didn't last long. They were finished off with potassium cyanide or chloroform. The dead were burned, and the process started all over again. Officially, around 3,000 people died in Unit 731, but some experts say the real number is close to 10,000. As the war turned against Japan, the entire site was erased bit by bit. Buildings were burned, medical and administrative records were shredded, and any evidence that could be used to prosecute the researchers was destroyed. This intentional destruction is why Unit 731 is considered a lost location today. Even though some information survived through testimonies and captured documents, there's no way to know the full scope of what happened there. After Japan surrendered, the researchers were never punished. Instead, They negotiated immunity with the United States in exchange for their research data. Today, Unit 731 exists mostly in accounts, photographs, and scattered records. Tragic as Unit 731 was, at least we know what happened. Deeper down the iceberg, you'll hear about the Bermuda Triangle's evil cousin. Tier 2. Easter Island. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui if you're trying to blend in with the locals, is the world's most remote open-air art gallery. It sits in the Pacific Ocean, around 2,000 miles from the nearest landmass that is big enough to matter. The island is home to over 900 Moai statues carved between the 13th and 16th centuries by the Rapa Nui people. The statues are carved from volcanic stone and shaped to look human, with oversized noses, long ears, thick lips, and massive eyes. Some Moai were sculpted with full torsos, minus the legs, while others are just heads sticking dramatically out of the hillside. To make the eyes extra unsettling, the Rapa Nui used white coral with black obsidian pupils. They stand anywhere from 13 to over 30 feet tall, and weigh between 14 and 80 tons. If one toppled into your driveway, the insurance claim would probably bankrupt you and your neighbors combined. Most of the Moai were carved at a volcanic quarry at Rano Raraku, miles away from where they were eventually placed, and then hauled across the island using nothing more advanced than ropes, wooden sledges, and stubborn determination. So why did they do it? Nobody knows for sure. The leading theory is that the Moai were tributes to important chiefs and spiritual leaders, a way of keeping ancestral authority literally looming over everyone. Whatever the case, they weren't built for fun. The statues aren't the only story here. Rapa Nui itself had a rise and fall saga. The population once boomed to about 15,000, but centuries of deforestation, resource exhaustion, and climate pressures left the place stripped bare. By the time outsiders showed up, the numbers had crashed to around 2,000. These days, Easter Island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Tourists fly in to gawk at the Moai, while the Rapa Nui people still celebrate their Polynesian roots with traditional music and dances. Big stone heads are strange, but not as strange as a hole in the earth that's literally been on fire for decades. That's in Tier 5. In the meantime, let's look into one of the wonders of the sea, Mariana Trench. The Mariana Trench is the deepest part of the ocean, and probably the last place you'd want to go for a swim. It sits in the western Pacific and looks like a long crescent-shaped scar carved into the Earth's crust. It stretches over 2,500 kilometers, is about 69 kilometers wide. At its deepest point, the Challenger Deep, plunges a staggering 36,000 feet. To put that in perspective, if you drop Mount Everest into the trench, its peak would still be more than a mile underwater. Humans first got curious about the trench in 1875, during the British Royal Navy's Challenger expedition. They lowered weighted ropes into the abyss and discovered depths nobody could have imagined. That was just the start, because as it turns out, we don't know when to quit when something's completely terrifying. In 1960, Swiss oceanographer Jacques Piccard and US Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh actually went down in a submarine called Trieste. Then in 2012, filmmaker James Cameron went solo and hit 35,756 feet. In 2019, businessman Victor Vescovo went even deeper, reaching 35,853 feet. Each trip proved one thing: the trench is still as alien and unwelcoming as ever, and it probably has a sense of humor about that. But the real twist is that life survives down there. Despite pressures over 1,000 times what we feel at sea level, freezing temperatures and complete darkness, microorganisms, amphipods, and even larger fish manage to thrive there. Some of them even grow far bigger than their shallow water relatives thanks to a little trick of nature called deep sea gigantism. In 2016, researchers from Oregon State University lowered a hydrophone, a specialized underwater microphone, into Challenger Deep and ended up picking up everything from earthquakes and typhoons to whales singing and boats cruising by. Today, the Mariana Trench is still mostly unexplored, and scientists are still trying to figure out how life exists in a place that seemed designed to kill anything that enters. Eternal Flame Falls. If you ever thought fire and water couldn't exist in the same place, you're wrong, and Eternal Flame Falls is proof of that. The waterfall is about 30 feet high and sits in Chestnut Ridge Park in western New York. At first, it looks like any other waterfall, until you notice a tiny orange flame flickering inside a small rock enclosure right behind the water. The flame stays lit even as water pours just a few feet away. Depending on the season and weather, it can rise up to about 8 inches. Visitors have been drawn to this strange combination of fire and water for decades. and local stories, myths, and folklore have grown around it. Some people say Native Americans lit the flame centuries ago, while others just shrug and call it nature's little joke. The flame actually has a solid explanation. Methane gas constantly seeps from the rocks behind the waterfall. As it rises and mixes with air, it ignites. The water plays a role too. As it flows over the surrounding rocks, it helps release trapped methane and keeps the fire fed. In other words, the waterfall itself is part of the flame's fuel system. Despite being called eternal, the flame can go out from wind or water, but it can easily be relit with a match or lighter. Over the years, it has fascinated scientists and visitors alike because it looks impossible. But in reality, it's a simple chemical process that just happens to create something rare. Island of Dolls. The Island of Dolls, or Isla de las Muñecas, depending on who's telling the story, looks like something a horror film director would dream up. Except it's very real. It's located in Xochimilco, just south of Mexico City, and the place is covered with hundreds of broken, sun-bleached dolls hanging from trees. Some are missing eyes, some are missing limbs, and all of them look like they'd crawl into your room at night if given half a chance. The story goes back to the 1950s, when a man named Don Julian Santana Barrera decided to live alone on this little patch of land. Not long after he moved in, he claimed a young girl drowned in one of the canals. Some say he found her body floating. Others say he ignored her cries for help. Whichever version you believe, he swore her spirit started haunting him, crying out for her doll. One day, he spotted a doll drifting in the same canal. He tied it to a tree, maybe as an offering, maybe as an insurance against being haunted. But one doll turned into 2, then 10, then hundreds. For the next 50 years, he collected dolls any way he could, fished them out of the water, dragged them from the trash, even traded vegetables from his garden for them. Most were broken, headless, or missing chunks, which only made the place creepier. The island slowly turned into what looks like a graveyard for childhood toys. Then came the creepy twist. In 2001, Don Julian was found dead, floating in the very same canal where the girl had drowned. His nephew discovered the body. Today, the Island of Dolls is a tourist attraction. Visitors swear they've seen the dolls move their heads or shift their eyes, and some even claim they've heard whispers in the trees. Others leave offerings, hoping the dolls will grant them luck, because nothing says life-changing blessing like bribing a sun-faded one-eyed doll swaying from a tree branch. Tier 3. Overtoun Bridge. Overtoun Bridge looks normal to us, but dogs seem to see it differently. It was built in 1895 as part of the driveway to Overtoun House outside Dumbarton, Scotland, and over the years it gained a reputation for one very strange reason. Dogs kept jumping off it. People first noticed it in the 1950s. Dogs would suddenly leap into the ravine below, sometimes surviving, often not. Around 300 cases have been recorded so far. By the 2000s, the stories made their way online, and the bridge became infamous. Since then, many dog owners have reported seeing their pets act strangely in this area. One dog, Cassie, ran to the edge, stared at something above the bridge, and jumped. Another survived the fall, ran back up, and jumped again. For years, both researchers and locals have tried to make sense of it. Staff at Overtoun House say dogs often get restless or agitated just before they jump, and some think that behavior is triggered by the scent of wild animals like mink or pine martens in the area. In 2010, an animal behaviorist studied the bridge and found that most dogs who jumped were long-nosed breeds with strong scent-tracking skills. His findings support the idea that wild animal scents could be a factor. But he also noticed that the bridge's design might confuse dogs about exactly where the drop starts. Some locals, however, have suggested a more supernatural explanation. They believe the ghost of a grieving widow, known as the White Lady of Overtoun, might be influencing the dogs. The bridge has a darker human history as well. In 1994, a schizophrenic father threw his baby off the bridge, convinced the child was the Antichrist. No one really knows why dogs keep jumping. Safest move? Keep pets away from bridges that seem normal to us, but clearly send mixed signals to them. Fairy circles of Namibia. If you ever flew over the Namib Desert, you'll notice something strange. The sand looks like it's covered in perfect polka dots that stretch from northern South Africa all the way to southern Angola. These are called fairy circles, and they look like someone went out there with a giant cookie cutter and started punching holes in the desert. Each one is just a bare patch of reddish soil surrounded by a neat ring of grass. Up close, they seem simple enough. Most are between 4 and 8 meters wide, though some stretch up to 20. But when you look at them from above, the pattern is almost too precise to be random. Scientists have been arguing for decades about what's behind them, and two main theories keep coming up. One blames termites, the other blames the lack of water. The termite theory came first. Researchers found sand termites living under some of the circles and figured they were eating the grass, leaving behind bare patches. The empty space then allows water to seep underground, keeping the soil moist. The grass along the edges taps into the water and thrives, while termites keep doing their thing below the surface. That explanation worked for a while, until a 2022 study threw a wrench in it. Scientists went back and noticed that the plants were dying before the termites even showed up. That's when the water theory started making more sense. It suggests that in a place as dry as the Namib, plants have to spread out just right so they don't steal water from each other. Over time, that separation creates those evenly spaced circles. Of course, local myths offer their own explanations, and they're way more fun. The Himba people say the circles are footprints of the gods, created by their ancestor, Mukuru. Others believe a dragon lives underground, and its poisonous breath burns the grass away. So far, no single theory has explained everything perfectly. Maybe it's the termites, maybe it's the plants, or maybe, as the locals say, the gods just have a strange sense of design. Death Valley. If you ever wanted to film a survival reality show without having to build props or hire a set designer, Death Valley National Park would do the job for free. Sitting in Eastern California, it's the hottest, driest, and lowest national park in the US. Back in July 1913, the place hit 134 degrees Fahrenheit, or 56.7 degrees Celsius, which for context is the hottest air temperature ever recorded on Earth. People like to joke about frying eggs on car hoods there, but the truth is, you'd be fried faster than the egg. As life-threatening as this all sounds, the real mystery of Death Valley isn't the temperature, it's the rocks. The park is home to a bizarre phenomenon called sailing stones. For more than a century, heavy stones have been caught sliding across the desert floor. No one ever sees them move, but they leave long trails behind them, some stretching over 1,500 feet. For decades, nobody could explain it, so the theories just piled up. Some said magnetism was pulling them. Others blamed pranksters, or aliens sneaking in at night to play bowling. The mystery lasted until 2014, when scientists finally cracked it with time-lapse cameras. What happens is a thin sheet of ice forms on rare cold nights, and when it cracks under sunlight, the wind pushes the rocks slowly across the slick mud underneath. It's not as exciting as aliens, but hey, at least we know Death Valley isn't haunted by restless boulders. The funny part is, even after solving the mystery, no human has actually witnessed the stones sliding in real time with their own eyes. The cameras caught it, sure, but standing there and watching one move remains on the bucket list of things humans would love to see but probably won't. Outside of its rock magic, Death Valley has played a supporting role in Hollywood. Parts of Star Wars, A New Hope, and Return of the Jedi were filmed there. For anyone curious enough to visit, the park is open to tourists who are willing to spend their time exploring somewhere nicknamed Death Valley. Patomskiy Crater. Deep in the forests of southeastern Siberia sits the Patomskiy Crater, one of Russia's strangest geological mysteries. Locals call it the Fire Eagle's Nest, which sounds dramatic, but the name actually fits. It's a giant mound made mostly of broken limestone, about 40 meters high with a 160-meter wide base, and a smaller dome in the middle that sticks up another 12 meters. When scientists measured it, they found the whole thing weighed over 1 million tons, and that's when it hit them that they had no real clue what they were actually dealing with. It was first spotted in 1949 by a geologist named Vadim Kolpakov, who probably had one of those "what on earth am I looking at" moments while standing there. Scientists later figured out the crater is roughly 350 years old and contains traces of radioactive strontium and uranium. What makes it even weirder is that it seems to be changing shape slightly over time, as if the ground under it hasn't fully settled. Since the discovery, researchers have tossed around a handful of theories, but no one can agree on a final answer. The most popular guess is that a meteor hit the area, opened up a gas pocket, and blew out the crater. Some people even linked it to the Tunguska event, the massive 1908 explosion that flattened miles of forest. But the timeline doesn't match. This crater was already there long before that. Another theory says it might have been caused by a rare type of volcanic eruption, something like Krakatoa back in 1883. It's true that the region has an ancient volcanic field, but there's no solid evidence of any recent volcanic activity near the site. Then there's the idea it was created by an underground gas explosion. Siberia is full of natural gas reserves, and if one pocket built up too much pressure, it could have blasted through the surface and left something like this behind. It's plausible, but still not proven. And of course, you can't have a giant mysterious hole in the middle of nowhere without someone blaming aliens. A few UFO enthusiasts think it's a landing or crash site, but most people just laugh that one off. No matter which theory you prefer, the truth is that nobody really knows what happened here. The Patomskiy Crater just sits there in the middle of the woods, huge and silent. Baltic Sea Anomaly. In 2011, the Ocean X team, a Swedish deep-sea exploration group, went diving in the Baltic Sea hoping to find old shipwrecks or treasure. They were expecting rusty anchors, broken bottles, maybe even a cannon if they were lucky. Instead, they found something that looked like it belonged in a UFO file. About 91 meters down, their sonar picked up a circular structure that was 60 meters wide and twice the size of a football field. They called the structure the Baltic Sea Anomaly, and ever since, people have been arguing about what it actually is. The weirdness didn't stop with the shape. According to Ocean X, when their divers got close, their electronic equipment started glitching. Lights cut out, cameras stopped working, and even their satellite phone refused to cooperate. As soon as they backed away, everything magically started working again. Natural rock formations don't usually mess with electronics, so this little detail just made people all the more interested. As expected, it didn't take too long before theories started pouring in. Some people said it was an ancient structure, like an underwater Stonehenge left behind by a lost civilization. Others decided it had to be a crashed UFO, or maybe even a gateway to another dimension. A few went with Atlantis because, well, when something weird shows up underwater, Atlantis is the default guess. Scientists, as usual, tried to drag the conversation back to reality. They suggested it was a glacial deposit left behind from the Ice Age, or maybe the remains of a Nazi U-boat base from World War II. Those explanations sound reasonable, but they don't explain why electronics freak out around the thing. Last I checked, rocks don't usually kill your Wi-Fi. Now, the Baltic Sea Anomaly is just sitting there. Too weird to ignore, but too inconvenient to solve, fueling conspiracy forums and giving divers a reason to keep their equipment insured. Tier 4. Lake Michigan Triangle. Everyone knows the Bermuda Triangle, but not many people know it has a less glamorous cousin up north called the Lake Michigan Triangle. It runs from Ludington to Manitowoc, then down to Benton Harbor and back around. The trouble started back in 1679 when Le Griffon, a French ship hauling over 5,000 kilograms of fur, sailed into the sea and never sailed out. Not a single plank, pelt, or crewman was ever seen again. At the time, people chalked it up to a storm, so it was seen as a tragedy. But it wasn't a mystery just yet. In 1891, the triangle struck again. The schooner, Thomas Hume, left Chicago and didn't come back. A rescue ship went looking and found nothing. Fast forward a few decades to the 1920s, and another ship called Rosabelle was found overturned in the water. The vessel showed signs that it had been involved in an accident, but there was nothing to explain why her entire crew was missing. Later, the United States Coast Guard determined that there had been no accident. The strangest case came in 1950, with Northwest Airlines Flight 2501. The plane had 58 people on board when it vanished over the lake. Search teams found only scattered human remains, but never recovered the engines or the fuselage. Witnesses swore they saw a red light hovering over the lake that night, which sent UFO enthusiasts into a frenzy. Naturally, skeptics say all this could be explained by storms, compass malfunctions, or just plain bad luck. But where's the fun in that? Believers claim the area is an energetic vortex, a swirling trapdoor that pulls in anything unlucky enough to cross its path. The catch is, the triangle isn't much of a triangle at all. It's more of a rectangle, which doesn't have the same ring to it. Nobody's lining up to make documentaries about the Lake Michigan rectangle, but slap triangle on it, and now it's mysterious. Blood Falls. Back in 1911, an Australian geologist named Griffith Taylor stumbled across something in Antarctica that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. Right in front of him was a bright red waterfall pouring out of a glacier in the middle of one of the coldest, driest places on Earth. Naturally, Taylor and his team freaked out. Then they tried to calm themselves by blaming the coloration on red algae in the ice around the water. But that explanation didn't hold up for long. For decades, nobody could figure it out. The water wasn't freezing even though it was coming out from under a glacier. And on top of that, it was somehow able to support life. Scientists eventually found a hidden community of microbes down there that live without light, oxygen, and barely any nutrients at all. They make humans look like the pampered houseplants of evolution. By 2003, the puzzle started to make sense. The water turned out to be loaded with salt, more than twice the levels you'd find nearby. The salt stops it from freezing, no matter how brutal the conditions get. And the red color? That's just iron picked up from the bedrock. Once it hits the air, the iron reacts with oxygen and turns into rust. So what looks like the earth bleeding is really just liquid rust dripping out of a glacier. Of course, that still doesn't make it less creepy. Scientists are fascinated by the microbes that survive in it, because if life can make it there, maybe it can survive in other extreme places, like Mars. What started out as a terrifying red waterfall in the middle of nowhere ended up being one of the best natural experiments in how far life will go just to keep existing. Crooked Forest. In the village of now Zarnawa in northwestern Poland, there's a patch of trees that look like Mother Nature tried carpentry and gave up. About 400 pine trees grow there, but instead of standing tall and straight, each one bends sharply at the base before shooting back upward as if nothing happened. The trees were planted around 1930, but how they ended up with this odd shape is still a mystery. The theories are all over the place. Some say heavy snow weighed them down when they were young. Others blame a strange gravitational pull in the area. And then there's the practical explanation, that people bent the trunks on purpose so they could use the curved wood to build furniture or boats. If that's true, the project was abandoned when World War II broke out, leaving behind a forest full of half-finished raw material. Of course, no mystery is complete without aliens sneaking into the conversation. If humans can't figure something out, the next logical step is to, must have been the work of extraterrestrials, and then keep it moving. Whatever the cause, the Crooked Forest is now a tourist attraction. People show up to walk among the bent pines, take pictures, and wonder what happened. It's equal parts strange and unsettling. The Richat Structure. The Richat Structure, better known as the Eye of the Sahara, looks exactly like the kind of X marks the spot an alien would leave if they wanted to troll archaeologists for eternity. It sits out in Mauritania's Aurora region near Ouaddaine, and from the ground, it doesn't look like much. From space, though, it's a perfect bullseye carved into the desert, stretching nearly 40 kilometers across. That's bigger than some cities, which is why astronauts and pilots love it. It gives them something more interesting to stare at than endless sand. For a long time, scientists thought the eye was the scar of a massive asteroid strike. It would have made sense, right? The giant target mark on Earth must have been something crashing into it. But the closer they looked, the less evidence they found to support this claim. There was no glowing alien rock or cosmic fireworks at the site, just erosion doing its thing for millions of years. Wind and water slowly peeled away the softer rock, exposing the tougher stuff underneath, layer by layer, until nature accidentally drew a perfect set of concentric circles. Of course, people weren't satisfied with the erosion explanation, so they decided to spice things up with their own theories. Some claim the eye lined up with Plato's description of Atlantis. The geography doesn't exactly line up, but since when has that ever stopped a good conspiracy theory? If you squint hard enough, everything can be Atlantis. No matter what theory they choose to believe, most people agree that the Richat Structure is unsettling. Mostly because it's a reminder that Earth's natural processes can leave behind something that looks designed. It's like the planet occasionally likes to prank us, just to remind us we don't actually know it as well as we think we do. Aurora Islands. A lot of people think of the Aurora Islands as the ultimate prank pulled on map makers, and it kind of makes sense. In 1762, sailors on a Spanish ship called Aurora swore they had stumbled on 3 islands while traveling from Lima to Cadiz. The ship had been blown off course, but the men insisted the islands were real. 2 more ships confirmed the sighting in 1774 and 1794, so cartographers dutifully added them to maps all over Europe. Problem is, nobody ever actually found them again. For 60 years, sailors tried steering their ships toward the island and came back with nothing but empty seas and bruised egos. In 1820, explorer James Weddell sailed to the supposed location in clear weather and collected proof that the islands didn't exist. Yet for some reason, the islands kept showing up on maps until the 1870s. So what really happened? Did the islands vanish, sink, or were they just fever dreams of men who hadn't seen land, fresh food, or a decent night's sleep in months? We'll probably never know for sure, but there are a few interesting theories. Some historians argue that the sailors mistook massive icebergs, weird fog banks, or just their own wishful thinking for land. Others say it could have been shag rocks, which do exist, or a volcanic island that later sank back into the sea. Still, no one has ever given a solid reason for why the Aurora Islands disappeared. What we do know is that they're a perfect example of why you probably shouldn't draw new land masses on a map just because a few sailors swore they saw something while lost. Tier 5. Door to Hell. The Darvaza Gas Crater. better known as the Door to Hell, sits in the middle of the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan. It's essentially a giant pit, 70 meters wide and about 30 meters deep, that's been on fire for more than 50 years. No one's feeding the flames, and yet it just keeps burning. The story goes back to the 1970s, when Soviet engineers were drilling for natural gas. The ground gave way and left behind this massive crater. Their solution was to light it on fire to burn off the poisonous gases. They figured it would be out in a few weeks, but they couldn't have been more wrong. They didn't know at the time, but they had just started one of the world's longest-running campfires by accident. The fire feeds on methane that seeps from vents in the crater's floor and walls. Normally, gas fields run out eventually, but the Karakum Desert is practically sitting on an endless supply, so the flames keep finding more fuel. That's why nobody's managed to put it out. Turkmenistan's president has ordered the fire extinguished more than once. First in 2010, then again in 2022. Yet here we are, with the crater still glowing. Scientists would love to study it more closely, but it's one of the hottest places on Earth, which makes fieldwork a little tricky. That hasn't stopped the Door to Hell from becoming a tourist attraction, though. People actually travel across the desert just to stare at a burning hole in the ground, which kind of proves humanity never had much self-preservation to begin with. In 2013, National Geographic explorer George Coronis actually went into the crater to collect soil samples. He wore a heat-resistant suit, a Kevlar harness, and the kind of gear that screams bad idea. He later said that every time he dug into the ground, new flames shot up right where he'd just touched. The Door to Hell has been burning since the early 70s, and no one has figured out how to stop it. So now it just keeps going. North Sentinel Island. North Sentinel Island is part of India's Andaman Islands, tucked away in the Bay of Bengal. On the map, it looks small and unassuming, but it's home to one of the most mysterious groups of people alive today, the Sentinelese. They don't have a giant Do Not Disturb sign hanging over their beach, but they might as well, because anyone who tries to step foot there quickly learns the welcome policy is arrows first, questions never. What makes this island fascinating is that it's like stepping into a time capsule of human history. While the rest of us got busy building cities, inventing smartphones, and arguing with strangers on the internet, the Sentinelese stuck to their own system and shut the door on everything else. And they've made it very clear that door stays shut. History is full of stories of outsiders who tried to land there and didn't come back alive. There was one exception though. In 1991, Indian anthropologists managed a handful of cautious visits. They brought coconuts and other gifts, and the Sentinelese accepted them. For a moment, it looked like contact might actually work, until the visitors were firmly told it was time to leave. Since no one spoke the language and the tribe had zero interest in letting anyone stick around long enough to learn it, the exchanges didn't go further. Today, Indian law makes the island strictly off limits. Nobody is allowed within 5 nautical miles of its shores, because exposure to outside diseases could wipe them out. Their immune systems have never dealt with modern viruses, and the government isn't interested in accidentally starting an extinction event. The rules are so strict that if you wander too close and the Sentinelese kill you, the authorities won't intervene. So maybe cancel that trip and stay home instead. Today, historians and scholars agree that the real mystery of North Sentinel Island is what the Sentinelese know about survival and history that the rest of us never will. And maybe that's the point. Mystery Spot, California. At first glance, the mystery spot in Santa Cruz looks like nothing more than a patch of forest. But step inside and suddenly physics packs its bags and leaves you on your own. People lean at strange angles without falling over. Balls roll uphill like they're rebelling against gravity. And walls don't seem to sit straight no matter how long you stare at them. The whole place feels like reality got bent out of shape and forgot to fix itself. The story starts in 1939, when surveyors noticed their compasses spinning like they'd had one too many drinks. That strange detail caught the attention of George Prather, who bought 3 acres on the hillside and decided to turn the weirdness into a business. By July 1941, he had thrown up a crooked cabin and opened it to the public. From that moment on, visitors have been wandering in, watching physics melt in front of them, and leaving either amazed or mildly motion sick. So what's really happening here? The scientific explanation is that the mystery spot is a gravity hill, a place where the shape of the surrounding landscape tricks your brain. What looks like uphill is actually downhill, and what looks like a straight wall isn't really straight at all. That illusion alone is enough to explain why balls seem to roll the wrong way, and why your body suddenly forgets how balance works. But if you think the scientific explanation is boring, don't worry. There are plenty of others. Some visitors claim the area is laced with giant metal cones buried underground to guide UFOs. Others point to radiation, a hole in the ozone layer, carbon dioxide leaking from the Earth, or even a magma vortex just hanging out under Santa Cruz. If you're going to feel dizzy, you might as well have a dramatic explanation ready for the ride home. These days, the mystery spot has turned into one of California's busiest roadside attractions. Thousands of people show up every year. They go in, pose for a few gravity-defying snapshots, and leave convinced they've just walked through a glitch in the simulation. HAARP Base. HAARP, or the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, sounds boring enough when you first hear about it. It's run by the University of Alaska Fairbanks and focuses on studying the Earth's ionosphere. That's the layer of the atmosphere buzzing with charged particles from the sun. It makes long-distance radio signals possible and gives us the northern lights, which is enough reason to poke around in it. The HAARP facility sits near Gakona, Alaska, and its main tool is something called the Ionospheric Research Instrument, or IRI for short. Picture 180 antennas spread across 30 to 40 acres, all working together to temporarily energize small portions of the ionosphere and then measure what happens. Officially, this helps scientists better understand how the ionosphere functions. Unofficially, it looks like a sci-fi villain's lair. The program started in 1993 with funding from the US Air Force, the Navy, and DARPA. The stated goal was to improve radio communication and surveillance. Pretty straightforward stuff, except nothing involving the military, secret funding, and giant fields of antennas ever stays straightforward for long. Pretty soon, conspiracy theories started spreading like wildfire. Some people claimed HAARP could control the weather and summon hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, or droughts on demand. Others blamed it for blackouts, thunderstorms, Gulf War syndrome, and even chronic fatigue. There's also the theory that HAARP sends out waves to control human thoughts. If that's true, it's safe to say they haven't perfected it just yet, given how chaotic people still are. Things escalated when in 2016, 2 men arrested on drug charges were also caught planning an attack on the base. They had AR-15 rifles, Glocks, a Remington rifle, and thousands of rounds of ammunition which they planned to use in their mission to free humanity from a mind control machine. They believed HAARP was trapping people's souls, and according to them, God had personally instructed them to destroy it. In reality, HAARP is still just a science project studying radio waves and the upper atmosphere, but the secrecy and the look of the place keep the conspiracies alive. Göbekli Tepe. Back in 1963, surveyors noticed a few odd stones sticking out of a hill in southeastern Turkey. They mapped it, shrugged, and left. For 3 decades, nothing happened. Until 1994, when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt came along, took one look, and realized this was no ordinary pile of rocks. A year later, proper excavations started. What came out of the dirt was a stone complex built around huge T-shaped pillars arranged in circular enclosures. At first, people guessed they were grave markers, but the evidence moved the conversation in a different direction. Carbon dating places the site at more than 11,000 years old, which means these pillars were raised by hunter-gatherers long before anyone settled down and invented farming. That makes Göbekli Tepe the earliest known temple, a place used for religious and ceremonial gatherings by people who supposedly still lived on the move. The pillars themselves are striking. Many are carved with animals, lions, foxes, gazelles, birds, and with abstract symbols, including belt and loincloth motifs. Some pillars reach about 5 meters high and weigh up to 10 tons. Picture Stonehenge, only older, heavier, and covered in prehistoric carving. How they made and moved those stones is still debated. The local limestone seems to have been worked with flint tools, and archaeologists suggest the pillars were shaped on site and transported using ropes, long wooden beams, and manpower. Those ideas are plausible, but none fully explain the scale of coordination implied by the site. That's the nuance people miss. This is clearly the work of organized groups with social systems capable of large projects long before we thought such organization existed. Göbekli Tepe flips the usual story of civilization on its head. The long-accepted model said people farmed first, settled down, and only then started building temples. But here we've got massive ritual structures that went up before farming was even common, which suggests it may have been shared rituals and cooperation that pushed people into settled life, instead of farming leading the way. That's all we have for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.